Zag Talk with Carson, B. Mary, and myself, and welcome to blowout season. Now that we've gotten to non-conference, we found ourselves with a lot less to preview and review in each episode, which means they may be a little bit shorter, but we also hope to add some more interview content over the next few weeks, as we already have lined up talks with Evan Miyakawa and Gino Crandall, who's a mainstay on Zag Twitter. This week, we will talk about last week's doubleheader with Northern Arizona and Dixie State, and then talk about our first non-conference win over San Francisco on Saturday. We'll follow it up with a quick preview of Santa Clara on Thursday and Portland on Saturday. Let's get into it. Northern Arizona, first game of the week last week, first game of the doubleheader, 88-58 win for the Zags. I think this is probably, of our blowout wins the last couple of weeks, probably our most well-balanced attack. Nemhard and Dom both put up double digits off the bench. 11 guys scored. We finally saw Arlaskis and Zakharov after a couple of games where they didn't check in. I'd say Cook was also impressive. He played 16 minutes. That's also important to remember as we talk about some of these later games too. He played 16 minutes in that game, I think 11 minutes in the Dixie State game, and didn't play at all in USF. So we can talk a little bit about that, what might have developed there. I'd say Dom probably had his best game of the season against Northern Arizona, finished with 12-2-2 in 17 minutes. Any other quick takeaways from Northern Arizona game before I hop over to Dixie State?
I think they played us how you're supposed to play us, but it wasn't as exciting as the Dixie State game. Earth to the teams that we're going to blow out. Just try and make it fun. Dixie State was much more fast-paced, a lot higher scoring, and to me, it led to a much more entertaining game. So that's kind of my takeaway.
Dixie State game, as B. Mary said, a lot more high scoring, finished with a 112-67 trouncing. Kispert did have put up 25 that game. Joel had a 12, 11, and 6 double-double. And then this game, Bala was really the one that shone through off the bench. He had his best game of the season, 17 points, 5 boards. Dom and Julian both had great games, both put up 8 points. Dom with 8, 5, and 3, and Julian with 8 and 2. Cook also played 11 minutes in this, and I think maybe one of the highlights of the Dixie State game, we got our first Ben Gregg sighting of the season. I know he only played about a minute, but just the fact that he checked in, and we weren't expecting to have that guy till next year, is pretty impressive.
From me, it was the second group, especially offensively, looked a lot better and more polished in this game, and that might be going back to, kind of the pace and the tempo of the game might have been a lot easier for them to kind of get into the flow of things after sitting on the bench for long periods of time during that game. But they looked to be clicking a lot more with each other and to really be moving and scoring. There wasn't a huge drought like we saw at the end of the NAU game. So that was good to see. The Ben Gregg, it was kind of cool to see the excitement on Twitter and kind of the anticipation of just a really unique situation and hopefully a bright future for him. So it's good to see him out there getting minutes.
For me, it was really awesome to see Balo show out a little bit. And I think the matchups just kind of worked well. Dixie State played a few folks that just stayed kind of in the post. And that allowed Balo to get in the game and really dominate, which was cool. He was not able to do that quite as much in the USF game, but that's mainly because Balo at this point can't switch on the perimeter like Drew Timme can. Overall, again, it was really good to see him play just absolutely stellar. I'm sure his efficiency numbers for the season went through the roof, seeing as he went 6 for 6 from the field with a total of 17 points. So that was really cool to see.
Yeah, I think that's really it from both of those games last week. And that wraps up non-conference at 9-0. Pretty exciting time to be a Zag. One of the biggest takeaways as we start to get into non-conference, especially, and it's shown through, and I think the Northern Arizona and Dixie State games, it's just weird to watch a game in the Kennel at McCarthy with no fans. It feels odd. I mean, I miss it, being there in general, but to have it be dead silent, you get to hear a lot more talking on the broadcast, which is kind of cool. I think Timmy's been talking up a storm. I think we talked about that a few episodes ago, that he's going to be the guy that chirps quite a bit this season. Heard a lot of let's goes and give me that and all that jazz. So I think that'll be fun to listen to, and kind of a weird way to watch games in the Kennel as well.
And then obviously last week we had the USF game. which ended up with a final score of 85 to USF's 62. It was really a back and forth battle in the first half, capped off by a Corey Kispert 40 footer. And that took us into halftime with a 10-point lead. And we never looked back. One of our big accomplishments in the second half was, I believe we held Jamari Bouye to 1 of 5 shooting in the second half, which was huge because he was 7 of 8 in the first half. I thought we did a much better job defensively in the second half, and that ultimately led to our 23-point margin of victory.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this coming into the episode where we thought this could be kind of a close game, and we saw a little bit of that in the first half. I just think USF really struggled to keep up with us, which, to be honest, most teams are going to have trouble keeping up with us this year. You kind of touched on it, Brian, where end of the second half, it actually got to a close game, I think maybe within a couple points. And then that's just kind of what this Gonzaga team can do to you, where, blink of an eye, next thing you know, we're back up 10 points and capped off by Corey Kispert, 40-footer, 30-footer. So it's just tough. I mean, you feel like you're back in the game, you're going to go into half with momentum, and then suddenly it's like, oh crap, what happened? Kispert, he's continued his campaign for National Player of the Year that really got strongly kicked off in the Virginia game. I think that was, even though, you'd had a couple 20-point games and was already averaging 20 points going into that, I think that was kind of his, I'm here, I should be more in this conversation. And he really hasn't looked back since then. He's shooting 63% from the field and 50% from three, 87% from the free throw lines. I mean, he's just on fire this year. He showed in this game, actually, variety of scoring. They were really trying to take away his 3-point shooting. And he was like, all right, I'm going to go to the hoop. I'm going to get fouls. I'm going to get to the bucket and score. And man, he can just beat you in so many ways. And I still do think he's probably the third best player on the team if you're looking at talent. But when your third best player can be your highest scorer at a super efficient clip, that's just what we're working with this year. So Dylan just talked about, the fan noise and not having it there. I think there were 2 times that really stood out in this game where we wouldn't have maybe gotten certain calls, or it would have just been a different atmosphere. First is Jalen Suggs' pass, the 3-quarter court pass that's going viral right now. I mean, that was absurd. And the kennel would have just been losing its mind. I think kind of shades of Geno Crandall crossing up Emory, where people are just losing their minds. I think that would have been it, especially if Harris would have finished the layup and gotten the and one. The other one, and I think this is a theme this year in college basketball, we're getting way more technical fouls called. Some of them are soft, hanging on the rims, but the trend is on block shots when people are saying, get that shit out of there, give me this shit. Like, everyone says that. It's physically impossible not to say that when you block a shot, and people are getting teed up left and right for it. And then Nemhard's, they're talking to somebody on the bench, and I think Few was telling the refs, hey, it's coming both ways. Like, they're talking from the bench too. And I just don't know if you're getting those technical foul calls when there's a crowd and it's loud, because they're not hearing any of that. So it's just been an interesting development this year. There's been a lot more technicals. I don't know if I've ever seen a Gonzaga season with this many technical fouls. You got Suggs with a couple, Nemhard. Who else? Few has one. So yeah, there was that. Cook, I was spreading a bit of misinformation on Twitter because I was thinking maybe Cook was in the doghouse because he kind of got yanked in a weird situation after a turnover in the Dixie State game, and then he didn't play at all this game. But turns out he hurt his leg against Virginia and was kind of working through it on the 2 games earlier in the week, and then is now needing an x-ray. So kind of the reverse situation of Jalen Suggs, but hopefully we can get him back and it's not super serious.
We kind of talked about this a few days back, but it's pretty incredible. It's a luxury to have the 7th guy off the bench get injured, not play for a game, and the next guy up, Dom Harris, put in maybe the 10 minutes that would have gone to Aaron Cook. And there was seemingly no let up on defense. I know that Harris was 0 of 4 from the field, but he kind of forced the issue a little bit on offense, and there was really no dip in that regard. And I know in years past, when we have been in situations where someone in the 7-man rotation goes down, there is a dip in performance. So that was a testament to our depth, which I think is going to yield amazing results come March and April. And we're going to talk about some of the developments on that front later on and why the depth is going to be so important. The other thing I wanted to just talk about with USF is I think it showed the level of coaching that Mark Few and Tommy Lloyd and the rest of the crew are at. And what I mean by that is, the old saying goes, you kind of want to be like water, take the path of least resistance. USF is really good at taking away the 3-ball. They clearly had a game plan of taking away the 3 from everybody except Drew Timme and Andrew Nemhard. And coincidentally, both of them hit 3s. But yeah, they didn't allow Kispert to get an open look. They barely allowed catches on the perimeter. And as a result, back cuts were open all day long. Mark Few knew that was coming, and we had a game plan to attack it. I think that, again, that's a testament to the level of coaching and game planning that this team has, and this coaching administration has been able to build up over the last 20 or so years. So
you don't think Few and Tommy are listening to this podcast and getting all their notes from us and then taking that and creating action plans based around it?
You never know.
They're one of they're one of the 40 weekly listeners, Few and Lloyd.
That's a great point too with Few and Lloyd that they, one other thing I noticed, and I think they touched on it on the broadcast too a little bit, was, San Francisco is getting some open drives to the basket. And there was even a couple where I had to rewind it and look because we were so far out of help defense ourselves on some of the drives, and it was Kispert, and I was just like, that doesn't look right. Like, Kispert's normally there, that must be a blown coverage. And then you look at it more, and we were doing the same thing that they were doing, where we were trying to take away their 3-point shooters. We were going to say, hey, get to the hoop, that's fine, we're going to outscore you. And I think it was Dick Howe on the broadcast was just saying, this was the game plan going in, and they're executing it. And yeah, it's tough to get driven by multiple times in a game, and it feels wrong, but we did that against Iowa. We said, hey, we're going to take away the 3-point shot. And we did. We limited them. We just limited San Francisco to the same thing. So this team defensively, I think we're ranked 16th in the country now in terms of efficiency. I think ability, obviously it's not the 2017 team, but the ability for them to follow a game plan has been really impressive to me so far, that it's not just a one-dimensional defense. We can kind of work multiple angles and adjust in different ways. So that was something that stood out to me as well.
Yeah, and I think when you outscore a team 23-7 in fast break points, you're probably okay giving up a couple dribble by moves and guys getting to the basket. And I think that was really what they did, right? I mean, you talk about playing to our strengths. You can get by us a couple of times if we're going to outscore you 23-7 in fast break points. And I think, and I texted you guys, as they were feeding Timme a lot in the post. At least I think coming out of the second half, they were feeding him quite a bit. We ended up outscoring them 44-24 in the post too. So, I mean, when you do those two things, you can give up a couple of easy baskets shutting down the 3. And the other point that you made, Carson, about Bouye had played pretty well in the first half. We shut him down. I don't think he scored in the last 15 minutes of the game. They got all their points from other players in the last 15 minutes of the game. So, I mean, that's huge when you're able to shut down another team's best player for 15 straight minutes. That's going to be a win almost every time.
Definitely. And I think Brian had touched on Nemhard too. And I know we've talked about Joel a little bit in these two, but I know we've been looking at 3-point percentage because they were off to a pretty rough start down in the low teens from the field. And it seems like both Nemhard and Ayayi have gotten back on track over these past few games. Obviously, Ayayi in a big way. He's now shooting 37.9% from 3-point. He was at 13% at one point this season. And Nemhard was really struggling too. And he's back up to 27.6. So not as strong of a reversion to the mean there, but I mean, they're both look more confident in their shots. And I think Nemhard's found his comfortable range in the mid-range. He doesn't miss those shots very often, and that kind of seems to be his way of getting going. And once he gets going, he's going to knock down a few. So I think I saw somebody on Twitter just saying, good luck stopping this team if Nemhard and Ayayi are knocking down 3-point shots too, or just our team in general, because what else are you going to do? I mean, we're shooting 60-some% from inside the arc. And then if we're going to knock down threes at a 35+% clip, see you later.
Yeah. And I think you said, they wanted to shut down Kispert from getting open looks. The only 3 he hit that game was that 30 whatever footer. Like that was his only three. He was 1 for 3. They took that away. It, gives opportunities for other guys to get open looks, like you said, backdoor cuts, but it also gives other guys opportunities to swing the ball quickly and get guys like Joel and Nemhard shots. And I think that's going to be huge for the offense as we, as Kispert does get more and more in the National Player of the Year conversation, as he continues to have these good games, teams are going to look to what other teams are doing to shut him down. If Kispert's able to say, okay, I'm going to take it to the rack, or I'm going to dish it out to other guys, that's going to be, we're going to be unstoppable, as we've seen through the first 10 games of the season.
And another guy too, he had kind of an up and down game against USF, but wanted to highlight him. Second half, Anton Watson had a great half. His first half was pretty bad. We were talking about that a little bit. It kind of seems like a theme now. He starts in the first half. He might have one or two aggressive moves that look good, and then he kind of disappears a little bit, kind of gets out of sorts, and then he doesn't start the second half, and then he comes in, kind of has this new kind of motivation, and he jumps in, he plays well. He had a few really good buckets on offense, and he was flying around defensively. So if we can get some more second half Anton Watson and get that a little more consistent, I mean, that's just another weapon on your tool belt there.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's mostly like the offensive inconsistency. Like I feel like he's looked pretty good on defense for the most part of most games, right? I feel like there's been parts where he slipped up, but we talked about even in the first couple games of the season when we were really ragging on him for his offensive consistency, he still looks pretty good on defense. He's still really aggressive. I mean, he doesn't get a ton of blocks, but he gets his hands in there quite a bit for steals, for knocking balls out of bounds, and just disrupting passing lanes in general. So I think it's really, for me, like the offensive consistency that I'm looking for him. Like you said, that second half Watson, getting that for a full game would be huge.
Yeah, I think defensively, his one weak area is on the perimeter. And I think that's why against San Francisco, he maybe struggles a little bit to stay on the floors, because they really do like to spread you out, and they're going to be running 5 out. And on a big guy, yeah, he can do that. But if he's guarding more of a wing player, he struggles to stay in front a little bit. But when he is on the perimeter, if you watch, I think almost every single time when his guy gets the ball, he almost always has some sort of deflection on it, like knock it out of their hands. They have to reset. Defensively, he has a really high floor. That's something he's always going to bring. But offensively, I think just they've mentioned it a lot on the broadcasts on the Root Sports games this year, where it's just, coming back from shoulder surgery, that's a tough one to come back from. I've noticed a few times, he gets contact and it's not really like, it's almost like he's kind of short arming it. And I don't know if that's still, getting used to a new shoulder or what that is, but the coaching staff seems to really be trying to set up some specific plays for him where they're getting it to him. They want him to go strong to the hoop, go up strong. And he's shown that in flashes this year. And it's an emphasis on the team, because when he does it, the whole entire bench erupts. The guys on the floor erupt. I know Nemhard came up and gave him a big chest bump in the second half when he had a strong and one. So they're really trying to get him going. And it's promising that he's showing some signs of life there, even though it's not a complete game yet. But hopefully by the time we get, to March and April, that it's going to be, clicking on all cylinders.
Yeah, those injuries are super hard to come back from, and we especially in basketball. I mean, we all know about Derrick Rose. I mean, he won the MVP and then tore his ACL, and he's really now kind of starting to get back into a rhythm for his career, which is great to see. But for a while, he was just kind of lost, and an injury like that can kind of give you a little bit of PTSD. You're maybe not going to go in and finish as hard. You're maybe not going to make as aggressive a moves because you don't want your shoulder to pop out again. That's understandable. I think that as WCC play goes on, he will have the ability to get more of those opportunities and kind of create for himself a little bit, hopefully get more confident with his shot on the 3-point line. He seems to be taking those shots. It's now just a matter of knocking them down on a more consistent basis. Because if that's the case and we can bring another defender out to the perimeter, it'll open up things a lot more for drives to the basket, as well as opportunities for Drew Timme to score too. Overall, more production from Anton Watson through WCC play and hopefully carrying it into the postseason will just be, I think, the best possible scenario for the team.
Yeah, and we talk about the type of injury too. It's not just a, blown out knee or something where it's a one-time thing. Like he had that thing pop out multiple times in the season. I was at the Portland game a year ago, 2 days ago. He was playing that game. It had already come out a few times at that point, and it obviously came out that game. He left the court, went into the locker room, then he came back out, and we're all sitting there like, why is he in the game? We're playing Portland. And then it comes out again. He's really not even using his arm on defense. So something that's happened so many times too. And, I think that's definitely going to be going off in the back of your mind quite a bit for a while until you get comfortable with it. So, give it time. He's a great defender. So he's not really hurting us out there on the court when he's in. We just know what he can do and his potential. So it'll be really fun to see when he really gets back to that.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting. I think he's had some, decent games against some of the really good teams, all the ranked teams we've played so far this season. But it was kind of that like back and forth of, you'd maybe play a really good team, you'd play a decent team, you'd play a really good team, you'd play 2 cupcake games, you got Iowa next, right? Like, I think it'll be interesting to see how he progresses from a confidence standpoint on offense, especially as we get into like 5, 6, 7 games in a row. Maybe you got a BYU or St. Mary's in there. St. Mary's doesn't look amazing this year, so like maybe not even that game. But when you start to get 5 or 6 games in a row where he can get 8, 10 points, couple of boards, get an and one, get a strong drop step dunk, like that's going to do wonders for his confidence as well, without having a game thrown in the middle where maybe he gets picked on Zag Twitter a little bit more than he normally would against somebody like Santa Clara or something.
No doubt. Speaking of Santa Clara, we play them this week. So we recorded this podcast on Monday. On Tuesday, we found out that the Santa Clara game is going to be replaced by BYU. And since we are not psychic, we can't tell the future, we recorded a preview of the Santa Clara game. If you want to skip it, feel free to move ahead to the 26-minute mark, and we jump into Portland at that point. One last thing to note, we do play BYU Thursday, 5:30 p.m. on ESPN. All right, let's get back into it. Santa Clara is 6-2. They've got 2 losses coming against Colorado State and USC. At this point, they are ranked 122 in KenPom, which is good enough for fifth in the WCC, which, in all honesty, is a lot better than where they typically are. They are a much better defensive team than they are on offense. That kind of shows in their, individual stats, which we'll go into in just a second. They don't shoot the 3 ball very well. Their effective field goal percentage is good enough for 317th in the country. And at this point, they have 65.6% minutes continuity from last year. So they're a fairly experienced team, and they really have one guy, Josip Vrankic, kind of carries the load for the team a little bit. He's the only player that scores or who averages double figures. Beyond that, Vrankic and then Keyshawn Justice, who is leading their team in minutes this year, those guys account for about 40% of the shots taken by the team. With that said, the scoring is generally balanced. They've got 9 guys that are averaging more than 14 minutes a game. All 9 of those guys are averaging greater than 5 points a game. It's a little different than having 5 guys average double figures, but their scoring is pretty balanced. Everyone can do it. Vrankic is really their guy, though.
This game potentially could not happen. They had a couple of their games postponed last week, or at least one of them. As of right now, it's on, whereas we've already had a couple cancellations for BYU and I believe Portland, maybe. There's one other team, San Francisco, I guess, is playing Portland now due to cancellations of their own games. So hopefully all goes well. I know we played San Francisco last weekend, even though they had just played one of the WCC teams that was tested positive for COVID right after. So, fingers crossed everything works out okay. But I think if we're comparing the Santa Clara and Portland games to the NAU and Dixie State games, this is going to be much more along the lines of the NAU game, where it might be a little slower. Not that they run at a super slow tempo, but they are. Portland, as we'll touch on in a second, is very similar to Gonzaga in terms of they get up and down a lot. So this one might not be. They might try to control it a little bit more than maybe in the second game, but their offense is going to have a really tough time keeping up, even more than most teams do. Their defense is decent when you look at it. I mean, that's about 20 spots better than Iowa's defense, which we saw what we did to Iowa's defense. So I'm not sure that's a great thing, but yeah, they're a defensive team. Like Brian said, they bring back a lot of minutes from last year. So I think they'll have a decent WCC this year. I think they're kind of right at the top of the third tier, I guess, if you're putting Gonzaga in their own tier at the top, and then St. Mary's, BYU, and San Francisco kind of in that second tier. So they might give some of those teams a run for their money in a couple games. But
for Dylan's name watch, I'm gonna pick number 30, who is actually Carson from a Italian basketball team. It looks like he played in Napoli before coming over to Santa Clara. I'm gonna go with Guglielmo. Guglielmo. I have no idea. His last name
Robert Goulet.
His last name is Caruso. But I couldn't even begin on the first name, and I'm interested. I hope he plays so that somebody on the broadcast has to try to pronounce that guy's first name, because I don't have a freaking clue.
Googly Elmo sounds like a kid's toy. Like,
it's an Elmo with googly eyes, right?
That's my assumption.
Well, that was Dylan's butcher block of the week. So yeah.
What about Portland?
Yeah, moving into Portland, they're 6-3. 2 losses have actually come against Seattle U. They played them in their first game of the season, and then I think their most recent, and they lost by 12-16, which are not great losses. I mean, Portland's not a great basketball team, but Seattle U's 280th in KenPom, so not great. And then they lost to Oregon by 39. They did beat Oregon State, though, which, Oregon State's not great either, but anytime Portland's beating a power conference team, that's pretty good, especially when they've also lost twice by double digits to Seattle U. So they're ranked 284th in KenPom, which is second to last in the WCC, 314th ranked offense and 219th defense. So a little worse offense than Santa Clara and a lot worse defense. KenPom gives them a 0.3% chance to win this game. They have an even worse effective field goal percentage at 42.3%, which is good for 320th in the country. They only bring back 12.6% of their minutes from last year. And like I said earlier, they played a fairly quick tempo, 26 in the country. In comparison, Gonzaga's 7th. So it's a matter of a couple possessions more per game that they average. But they play fast, they don't play very efficient, and they don't play a whole lot of defense. Their record's better. I don't think they're as bad as some of the past few years of Portland teams, but they're still not a great team. In terms of individuals, Ahmed Ali is their leading scorer at 19 points a game. Eddie Davis is averaging 11.3 points per game. Other than that, everyone else is in single digits. It looks like they spread out their minutes primarily among their top 6 guys. They have another guy averaging 15 minutes and a couple right around 10. So it's going to be their starters and a little bit of help from the bench. They don't use it too often. I think KenPom has them at 20-some% bench minutes, 26.9%. So not using the bench a whole lot, not super experienced, as we said. So yeah, I don't have too much to say. Portland's given us some trouble in the past few years. Once again, so have other WCC teams. I just don't think this is the year that we're going to get too much run in the WCC.
Yeah, the 2 losses to Seattle U are not what stick out to me in terms of bad losses. What sticks out to me is the 5-point victory against Northwest University, which is a small NAIA school in Kirkland.
I think they're NAIA Division II. Also, they're not Division 1A NAIA, so that's a lot of Cascade Christian and some Curtis boys, and I don't know who else, but it's good university good school for NAIA basketball. But yeah, I don't know, not too much else there.
Yeah, I think, to be honest, the other news that's come out in the last couple of days is more interesting to me than Santa Clara or Portland and those games coming up. I guess maybe Dylan, tell us about Josh Perkins and the news that we have just received there.
Yeah, so Josh Perkins is going to be joining the list of Gonzaga players playing in Europe/abroad overseas. So he's going to be joining KK Partizan in Belgrade, Serbia. Couple of cool facts about this club. One, they just recently hosted Nigel Williams-Goss in the last couple of years. I also, through making sure that I was correct in that statement, did some Gonzaga research for this team. They also have hosted Blake Stepp for a season or two as well after his tenure in the NBA. So Also, tiny cool fact, one of the only other American-born players on that team was Eric Mika, who was at BYU over the last couple of seasons. So kind of cool facts there. Excited for Josh to continue his basketball career and join the long list of Euro Zags.
Yeah, and this is a pretty good step up in competition level from where he was previously. They play in the league that's right below Euro Cup or maybe Euro League in Serbia. He'll actually be in the same league as Filip Petrushev, I believe. So that's cool. And I think this is the team that Nigel played on where they won the championship for their league and he was MVP. I think that's this team. I might be mistaken with that, but some cool Gonzaga history there. And as I've tweeted before, this is a Josh Perkins. This is an anti-Josh Perkins slander Twitter account and podcast. So we're pro Josh Perkins here. So keep all the Josh Perkins slander out of here.
We'll defend him to the death.
Yes. More European basketball news for Zags over there. Nigel Williams-Goss, it came out today as well that he's nearing a deal with a Russian club, Lokomotiv Kuban. I'll join Dylan's butcher block with some of the names there. But yeah, so good for him. We know he was on Utah's roster in the preseason and unfortunately got let go, but good to see him back over there in the Euro Cup. So they'll have a chance to compete at a high level, which is good to see for him. So hopefully he keeps doing well over there. And then some other big news. Again, we had a lot come out today. The NCAA tournament is officially going to Indiana. We're going to have one main location for the tournament this year to try to reduce some of the travel. We'll be playing games at Lucas Oil Stadium, where they'll have 2 courts, but not playing games at the same time, which if you've ever been to the Washington State basketball tournament, the Hardwood Classic, you know how weird it is to have 2 courts with 2 teams playing. So now imagine that with one team, one game playing, and also add about 70,000 seats to that arena that you're going to be playing in. So that'll be interesting. They're also going to be playing at Bankers Life Arena, which is where the Pacers play. Hinkle Fieldhouse, we all know that from Butler and Hoosiers. Indiana Farmers Coliseum. Assembly Hall, where Indiana plays, and Mackey Arena, where Purdue plays. Apparently, they're looking to finish it in around 14 days. We were kind of talking about it today. We don't know if that's a strict 14-day thing because that turns into a pretty tight schedule. The tournament, if you don't include the first 4, generally finishes in around 18 days from Thursday in the first week to Monday in the start of the third week. So the whole timing of that will be weird. We might have some midweek games, tournament games this year, but I think they're trying to try to push back the start of the tournament as much as possible to try to put some time in between the end of conference tournaments and the start of the NCAA tournament so that we can make sure we're getting tests done and that, you know, any COVID problems are taken care of before it starts. So fingers crossed that works out well, and be pretty cool to see some tournament games over in Hinkle Fieldhouse and some of those other popular ones over in Indiana. So it's a good place to have it. I think I saw somebody say Springfield was the birthplace of basketball, but Indiana is really its home in terms of just the history there. So
it's one location that it's Indiana. Most of the games are going to be in Indianapolis. I expect pretty much after the first round, all the games to be at an arena in Indianapolis. So you have a lot more ability to keep guys, you know, restricted or whatever. So you don't have any COVID issues, but it will be interesting. I know, like, with it being potentially 14 days, that turnaround just for guys to like get from one of those other cities into Indianapolis, you've got a lot more potential for different things there. So I'd love it personally if they did something where, you know, they do, and I'm not saying, you know, 2 weeks in between, but, you know, throw 4 or 5 days in between round 1 and Sweet 16. And then I think from there, you can kind of run it out with a day, maybe 2 days in between games, but throw 4 or 5 days in there, make sure you do everything right. You keep everybody as, you know, safe as possible and hopefully limit the amount of guys that test positive or, you know, any disruption to the tournament itself.
Yeah, and I think my understanding is that all of the teams will be staying in downtown Indianapolis, and they're going to have a practice facility set up at the convention center where at one point they said they might have 20 courts. I don't know. That's a big ass convention center, but So they'd have that, and everyone would stay there, and that the first round games that would be at Assembly Hall and Mackey would be day trips. So those would be afternoon games. They would bus up there, play the game, and then come back so they can make sure everyone's staying, in a controlled environment at those hotels. So we might, or float the idea of, let's get some vaccinated frontline workers and, medical workers into the stands for free. Just give us some sort of atmosphere there. I can't imagine that they would choose to have the Final Four national championship games at Lucas Oil Stadium if there's no fans, because why do you need this giant, we know how bad dome shooting is and some of these arenas shooting in like these big open spaces are. So why not go do it at, Hinkle Fieldhouse National Championship? I don't know who's saying no to that. That'd be pretty sweet. In terms of the days, I could see them maybe throwing in the first four on the first day of the first round, and then making the winner of that game or those games play in the first round games the next day. So they'd have to go back to back. But just, so you're not having 2 extra days of basketball for 2 games. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see when that schedule comes out for what days are going to be what.
Yeah. When I first saw that they were going to try and squeeze everything into 14 days, it reminded me of the games that we had scheduled. And so I started looking around at other top programs' schedules, and it actually aligns pretty much exactly with what would happen if you were to advance all the way to the national championship game. So for context here, if you start the tournament on the second day, you get a day of rest between your first 4 games. So that means you play on the second day, the 4th day, the 6th day, and the 8th day. And then you would get 4 days of rest, play on the 12th day, which would be the Final Four, another day of rest, and then the national championship on the 14th day. And if you take a look at what we had scheduled, we were scheduled to play on December 8th, December 10th, December 12th, December 14th, and then 5 days later playing Iowa. As it happens, Duke had basically the exact same thing. Obviously, Coach K opted them out of 3 of their games. I think some of their opponents had to go on pause as well. But what they had scheduled was a game on December 4th, 6th, 8th, and then 12th. And so it's kind of something that had to be done by necessity because of the abbreviated season in scheduling this way. But it ultimately aligns really closely with the way that the tournament is set up. And so I think these top tier programs created their schedules like this in order to mirror that. And what we have seen is, a lot of teams go on pause, but a lot of these games actually get to be played. I think it's kind of a blessing that we've been able to play our last 7 games dating back to Iowa without any hiccups, really.
Yeah, I think they're maybe taking a note or kind of taking notes from the NBA bubble for the playoffs where, hey, we don't have to travel. We're going to play every other day. And that's fine because, it takes up 2 days to travel normally from one location to the other. So, one day in between first and second round games and Sweet 16 Elite 8 is the norm. It just might be instead of a week in between, a couple of days. And even if they didn't know for sure, I kind of have a feeling just based off the way the schedule has turned out that maybe Mark Few and Coach K and some of those other guys, got some hints or there was kind of some ideas floating around that this might be the way that it works out, where there's going to be some tight scheduled games with not a lot of rest. And even if they didn't know that, I think just throwing a lot of variability at the players and being like, all right, we're going to go travel here and be here for 2 weeks. And then we're going to go to this other place. And then we're going to play back to back with 2 days rest and then another back to back. Like they're just trying to throw everything at them so that they're ready to play. And as we've talked about before, and I know Coach Few talked about in his whatever the show is where he's, talking to, I don't know, what's it called, guys? The
Mark Few show?
Yeah, there we go. Yeah. Like he was talking about on the Mark Few show, you could roll out a ball and these guys could go play it like anywhere. It could be a concrete court somewhere out. You could go to Rucker Park and roll the ball out and they're ready to play. So I think if this team fits this year really well, where you just got a bunch of hoopers, guys who can just go ball out no matter what the situation, rain or shine, fans, no fans, back to back, tired legs, they're going to come and they're going to shove it down your throat. So
yeah, my guess is that a lot of these coaches have known for a long time. It's a lot easier to negotiate within an organization like NCAA and all the college coaches than it is to negotiate with a city or a state government. And so I'm sure that coaches knew before the season started, and maybe when they were in the middle of scheduling their games and everything, that they thought that this was how the postseason was going to take place. And they had just been waiting on if Indianapolis or whatever city was going to host it would be down to do this. And so I think that's probably the case. Again, it's a lot easier to negotiate with in an organization than it is to negotiate between an organization and a city, especially during times like this.
Yeah, and I think, Beamer, you mentioned at the top of the podcast, and Carson related to what you were just saying, but Gonzaga's depth is going to play a huge factor when you're playing that many games in a row with a day in between. If you're Iowa and you've got Luka Garza and he's, a majority of your offense, and I'm obviously, we've got our best players and we've got our scorers, but when you rely heavily on a guy like Luka Garza, you're telling me he's going to go put up 40, 5 games in a row? I mean, sure, maybe. He absolutely could. Don't get me wrong. He's a phenomenal basketball player. But at the same time, I also don't see that happening. I think teams like that are going to struggle, right? It's going to be the teams that have a lot of depth. It's going to be the teams that have a 7-man rotation where all 7 of those guys are starting on most teams in this country. And I think that's going to be a huge benefit to Gonzaga when we finally get to tournament time.
All right. Well, maybe to wrap it up, Dylan, maybe you want to go over a couple of the recruiting updates that we've had over the last couple of days and the last week or so.
For starters, Chet Holmgren, I think, kicked it off over the weekend. We had our first crystal ball prediction from one of the higher regarded recruiting reporters or whatever, kind of said Chet Holmgren to Gonzaga. We've since then had, I think, 3 total crystal ball picks, all sending Holmgren to Gonzaga. Now, I don't in any way think that that's 100% lock. That doesn't mean anything. There's for sure rumors have been circulated before and guys have been wrong, but pretty exciting to see our name at the top of those lists. You throw him in there. He's the number 1. I mean, maybe he finishes number 2 high school prospect for seniors this year in high school. Joins an already stacked class of Ben Gregg. He's on the team, but he's also technically class of 2021. You throw in Caden Perry, he's a top 100 recruit. You also throw into mix Hunter Salas, whose name has been bouncing around a little bit more in the rumor mill perspective than crystal ball predictions to Gonzaga, but he's, rumor has it we're in his top 3, top 5 for him as well. So you throw him in there. He's number 13 in class of 2021. You've got probably the best, if not the best, top 3 recruiting classes in the country. And we get our first ever number 1 overall recruit, at worst, first ever number 2 overall recruit. And then last little note on the recruiting front, we already have Fanbo Zhang has committed for class of 2022. I think verbal commit, hasn't signed anything. But he's one of those guys where he's from China. He could end up doing one of those reclassification things. We could see him next year as well. I don't know if we'd see much of him on the court, but he could end up turning into kind of a Ben Gregg thing where he, gets a year under his belt to develop before playing his first full minutes in a game.
Yeah, the 247 crystal ball predictions work. So Chet now has all 3 of the recruiters or the analysts projecting him as a 7 for their confidence level. I think it's on a scale of 1 to 10. And generally, I mean, I've seen stuff today where it's saying, oh, that means it's a 100% chance, or they see it as a 100% chance that he's going there. And it's like, yeah, okay. But that's, I mean, it doesn't mean anything really, but most times they're going to be right. I think if you look at the guy who is the lead guy on Chet, he's missed 1 ever where he didn't get it right, where his prediction was wrong, his final prediction. So, and if you've been on Zag Twitter, and I know at Zag Caldwell, he has his website, and it's been rumored for a long time that Chet would be going to Gonzaga. And same with Salas, that's been talked about for a long time on there as well. But that's now kind of, he was always a Kentucky guy, and now it seems like the tide's kind of turning. And I think he might have picked up another Gonzaga crystal ball projection. So trending in the right way. It seems like all signs are pointing to Gonzaga for both of those guys. I think the one that I would be a little more hesitant on at this point would be Salas, but it sounds from what I've read and heard that he should be a Zag. So those could start rolling in soon. You never know. I think Jalen Suggs, it was a year ago today or yesterday that he committed, and he was one of the later ones. So it's an exciting time. I mean, could you imagine 10 years ago, or even when we were at Gonzaga, our freshman, sophomore years, having a recruit like that? I mean, back then, Josh Perkins was like, holy crap, like, look, we got a top 50, whatever recruit he was, and that was a big deal. And I mean, now we're getting these guys on an annual basis. So fun time to be a Zag.
Do you guys think that both Jalen Suggs' success and Andrew Nemhard's eligibility status for this year played any sort of role in Hunter Salas's name being kind of brought back into the conversation? Because around October, one of the 24/7 Sports guys basically submitted his crystal ball that Salas was going to Kentucky, and he then flipped his crystal ball prediction. Do you guys think that those two factors have played a role at all in Salas's decision making?
It might. From my understanding, it kind of been a while. He's led a pretty quiet recruitment, and that maybe Gonzaga was just a little underrated by some of the analysts. But I mean, I know for other recruits, it's pretty huge to see that, Gonzaga not only can have these transfers come in and have a year off and develop guys, but then you can have a guy like Suggs come in and, pretty hard to have your draft stock go up when you're someone like Jalen Suggs, and now he's in the top 1, 2, 3 pick conversation. So it definitely doesn't hurt. I think they're just showing for the coaching staff more diversification in their skill set in developing players and coaching young studs like Jalen Suggs and hopefully Chet and Hunter as well. So I don't know, Dylan, what do you think on that?
Yeah, I think it's two-pronged. I think not as much the Jalen thing. I think everyone knew Jalen was going to be a one-and-done guy, probably, like, for the most part. I think Nemhard being eligible and also playing really well throws not only from like a development standpoint, but also just from like what's the roster going to look like next year. I think Nemhard will probably be one of the bigger questions come the end of the year. He will have a year of eligibility left, as this year has kind of been thrown in the doesn't count category, and he doesn't have to sit a year. So it'll be interesting from that aspect. I also think like Kentucky, to a large degree, not looking so hot this year, probably like, how do you not let that affect your thoughts about going to a program, right? If you see a team struggling that bad and they've got some elite level talent that's just straight up not playing on the court, I can't remember the guy's name, but they sent him home from the program. I mean, I think that probably doesn't look very good, or doesn't go over well with a new recruit. So, or a potential recruit. So I think that's probably the other piece of it.
Yeah, and I don't think necessarily a team playing poorly is something that's going to turn someone off. I mean, it's happened to Kentucky before where they had Nerlens Noel and they were flaming hot garbage and made the NIT and lost there. But I think just some of the internal stuff seems really weird right now. I don't know what's going on with Coach Cal. He's had some really weird tweets, things that should not have been brought outside the program, and it's just kind of odd. So I think if anything, yeah, that could turn him off. But like I said, it sounds like this has been in the works for going back before the start of the season. So who knows? But yeah, for Kentucky, that's definitely a red flag. If I was a recruit and going through a recruiting process, or my kids in the future were doing that, like, I would not be super interested in sending them to a program where, you might get put on blast on Twitter by a coach, like, yell at me, cuss me out. I don't care. Like, that's college basketball. That's high school basketball in a lot of situations, but like, you can take that, but keep it in house. Like, I don't know what's going on there, but
one other factor that shouldn't be overlooked is that Hunter Salas was actually able to take one of his official visits and he chose Gonzaga to visit. And in a recent interview, Ben Gregg also mentioned that he had been talking to Chet a little bit, but had been texting back and forth with Hunter Salas. I can see that playing a role, seeing as Ben Gregg has family in Spokane, grew up in Spokane. I would imagine a lot of the talk is really more around, is this the place I want to go? Obviously, it's a top tier program. I'm sure that Hunter Salas has his own opinions about the coaching staff and the culture of the team and everything. But more than anything, if I was moving halfway across the country, I'd want to make sure that I was going to a good place. And so I think the fact that he was able to visit and knowing that him and Ben Gregg have been chatting, I think also has probably played a role too.
That's the same situation with Chet. I saw something today that they were saying it's pretty big that he got to visit. I think it was last year. I don't know, Brian, we were at Craziness in the Kennel last year, I think, and that was when the Tricky Trio was there, and then Chet as well. So he got to have the visit, not during the actual season and games, but he got to visit, and I've seen that he wasn't going to be able to make any of those other visits that he had scheduled for this year. So that's kind of a huge piece too. So
Yep. And he got to see the crowd too. Even though he's not able to see it this year, he's like, wow. I mean, he seemed kind of stoic. I remember when he was there, but you can just tell he was kind of soaking it in and everything. And
so if we've got the Tricky Trio this year, and next year we get Salas and Chet and combine that with Caden Perry and Ben Gregg, do we have the Fierce Four? Is there anything better than that? Please tell me there's something better than that. Any thoughts?
It's Gregacy and the others.
Oh God. Clearly. If you're gonna, I'm all for the group Tricky Trio thing. I'm all for, but your own hashtag, and you're gonna play like a minute a game probably the most of the season. I don't know if I'm a big fan of Gregacy already.
Dylan, I think if you go back and look at your tweets and Facebook posts and Instagram posts from when you were 17, 18, it probably isn't super pretty.
Probably
either.
Worse. It's probably worse.
Probably worse.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Zag Talk. Give us a chance to put some cool content together over the next couple of weeks. We'll talk about some of the more non-competitive games as we get into WCC, but we'll also have some interviews coming for you with some cool people. So thanks for tuning in.
Go Zags.